Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a super powerful Solar 3.0 Hunter build that will allow you to do an absolutely crazy amount of damage with your throwing knife, one-shotting all kinds of enemies in the game, while also being able to spam your grenade, melee, and dodge like crazy, while also doing crazy amounts of gun damage by having Radiant and other buffs up 100% of the time. On top of all of that, we're also going to be getting a ridiculous amount of survivability as well, which is going to be really good. Overall, this build is super strong, and it's only going to get better the further that we get into the season when we unlock more of the artifact mods, etc. I don't want to keep you guys waiting, so let's just jump right into the build. If you guys like the video, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one. It's a little difficult to get into the Destiny content creation scene or whatever we're going to call it because there's just so many people that make videos. So if you guys like the video, please make sure to drop a like, helps me out a ton, and subscribe for more build videos just like this one. Also, I'm very curious about your guys' opinions on Solar so far, how powerful you think it is, how much fun you guys are having, how much you like it relative to Void. Feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about that. Also, let me know which builds you guys would like to see in the future. I plan to make a whole bunch of builds for all the characters, but yeah, just let me know. One thing I want to preface this video with is that this is more of an introductory version of the build. Like, I do think that this is fairly optimally set up. However, it's literally day 2 of Solar being out, right? There's a lot of combinations that just have probably not been figured out yet, and a lot of things that we don't have access to yet when it comes to the artifact. The more that we get the artifact unlocked, especially with Weathering Heat and stuff, the more that this build is actually going to get better and more experimentation is going to evolve. I plan to make more builds and probably an updated version of this build once I have the artifact fully leveled up, but I imagine a lot of you guys are going to take you a bit to get the artifact fully leveled up, as it's going to take me a bit. So I wanted to make a version of the build that's going to work for you right now, right out the gate, without having, you know, the artifact leveled up or anything, and something that's going to just be probably good regardless. I just wanted to preface the video by saying that this will probably end up just getting better than it already is because of that. So let's talk about my goal with this build, what I wanted to achieve, how you can achieve it, and exactly what we are taking advantage of. So first off, there's 3 things that I wanted. One is I wanted to take advantage of Radiant to do gun damage, and I wanted Radiant to be active all the time. If you haven't seen my previous video, highly recommend watching it. I give a pretty detailed explanation as to what Radiant actually does, how much damage it gives you, and how good it is if you take advantage of it with a lot of other things. I'll probably be referencing that video in this video, so feel free to watch that if you haven't already. But I wanted to have Radiant up all the time because it's incredibly strong, gives you a whole bunch of extra damage for your guns. But I also wanted to be able to spam my melee to just do a whole bunch of damage with it, throw it anytime that I see an enemy that's like a major or anything and I just want to kill them instantly. I thought that would be really fun. And I also wanted to just throw grenades a lot, because who doesn't like throwing grenades, right? Hunter doesn't have as much AoE on the face of it as it seems like Titan and Warlock does, but what it does have is a lot of damage with the throwing knife, as you guys saw at the beginning of the video. So let's get into how we're going to achieve all of those things. So first off, when it comes to doing a lot of damage with the knife, the reason that we're using the knife, by the way, not only is it going to do a lot of damage, but it's also going to enable us to have 100% uptime on Radiant very easily. So the build's all going to work very well together, and whenever you use the knife, you're going to spawn wells, which is then going to reduce the cooldown of your grenade. So it all just works very synergistically. And having the knife as just an extra, form of damage, kind of like a heavy weapon in your pocket, is really good. So we're going to be using Aethers' Embrace to facilitate our knife doing a lot of damage. If you don't know what this does, just rapid precision hits are going to increase the damage of your knife. I believe it's about ×3 extra damage. I could be wrong on that. But anyway, all you want to do is just get a lot of precision hits. You're going to get a buff that's going to increase the damage of your knife. Throw out the knife, consumes the buff, does a lot of damage. This is also going to make your weighted knife strong against, or work against Unstoppable, which is particularly nice, especially when you pair it with Withering Heat, which we'll talk about later. Pair the Aethers' Embrace with a 1-2 punch shotgun, which is then going to increase the damage of your melee even more. As you saw in the intro clip, or I'll just play it again right here, your melee just does a crazy amount of damage, which is really nice to have. Pair that with a way to debuff enemies. That's pretty much going to be the maximum amount of damage, such as Tractor Cannon, which is pretty much going to be the maximum amount of damage that you could do with one knife, and you can just literally solo run around and just do a crazy amount of damage with your knives over and over again. So let's talk about how we're going to be able to actually take full advantage of this by making our knives give us the cooldown back immediately so that we can spam it, as well as having Radiant up 100% of the time for us and our teammates, and how we can get some survivability out of this. There's a lot of different ways to set it up. I'll try to mention everything, but I don't want the video to be 30 minutes long and very confusing. I'll also have a written version of the build in the comments, because I managed to lose the template for the build, I don't know, images that I used to have, so I'll just have a written version of it for now until I get that sorted out. But anyways, let's just get into it. So obviously we're going to be using the weighted knife. This is what's going to work with Aether's Embrace and going to do the most amount of damage. What's nice about this is precision final blows with this knife is going to immediately recharge your dodge. If we use the Acrobat's dodge, this by default is going to allow us to have Radiant up all the time. You don't really need to use Acrobat's dodge though, because another way to get Radiant is Ember of Torches, which is really good. Powered melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies Radiant, and you don't actually have to get a kill. You just throw out the melee, and the second that it hits them, it's going to make you Radiant. This is really, really strong. You then think, okay, how am I going to have 100% uptime on this if my melee is going to have this long of a cooldown? Well, if you use the knock 'em down solar aspect while you are already Radiant, final blows with your throwing knife are going to fully refund your melee. And this works interestingly with Ember of Torches, because the second that it actually hits the enemy, it's going to make you Radiant, and then they're going to die from the powered thing, immediately refunding it to you. You don't actually have to preemptively activate Radiant through Acrobat's dodge or anything. The only reason that I have Acrobat's dodge on is I just like the animation, and it's a long cooldown, so it feels nice to be able to use, you know, the weighted knife and just immediately reset the cooldown. And it's nice to give yourself an on-demand Radiant whenever you feel like it, rather than having to throw out your melee, because you don't want to throw your melee on somebody that is then not going to die, because then you're going to have to sit there and wait for a 150-minute cooldown, which is not really fun. I'm not going to be stacking strength with this build, because ultimately I just want to have my grenade cooldown really, really low. You could stack strength, but there is actually a pretty convenient way to get your knife back immediately if you happen to miss it or you happen to not kill an enemy. We'll talk about that when it comes to the gearing section, but it's just a 1-2 finisher mod on your class item, but we'll talk about that later, obviously. When it comes to the grenade and stuff, I like to use the Firebolt grenade. Ultimately, you guys can let me know in the comments. I feel like these grenades, the solar ones, are pretty underwhelming in comparison to Void, unless you're, of course, on like Warlock playing Sunbracers or whatever. They just don't seem like they do as much damage. Solar Grenade used to be my favorite one, and it just doesn't really do a lot of damage. I like Firebolt because it's a low cooldown, kills things pretty quickly. One thing that's nice about the nades is that it's going to apply Scorch right, and then they're going to blow up with Ignite. And you would think that that's going to be really good with the knife. If you scorch an enemy with your grenade, and then you throw the knife on them to cause them to ignite and then blow up. The problem with this is that if an enemy dies from Ignite from your knife rather than the knife hit itself, it's actually not going to proc knock them down, so then you're not going to get your knife back, which is really, really annoying. When it comes to the rest of the aspect and the fragments and how you want to have it set up, obviously you pretty much need knock 'em down. This is going to be really good, which is also going to buff your Blade Barrage, which is why I'm using Blade Barrage. It does a lot of damage, and it's a pretty low cooldown. For your second aspect, I like to use On Your Mark literally just to give me more fragment slots. But if you want to use the other one where you get the little extra, grenade thing, that's pretty good. Does a lot of damage. You just lose some fragment slots, but I don't really think you need all the fragment slots. They're kind of just nice to have. In terms of the fragments that we're using, of course, going to be using Ember of Torches so that we get the Radiant with our powered melee attacks. That's going to be really good, and literally by itself give us 100% uptime on Radiant. And then we're using Ember of Tempering, so this is just going to give you a whole bunch of extra recovery. You're always getting solar weapon final blows because we're going to be using a solar weapon, so ultimately that's really good for survivability reasons, but again, that's something that you could take off if you wanted to swap to Gunpowder Gamble. Ember of Solace is nice. It's going to make Radiant last longer, from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, I believe. Ember of Benevolence is just nice because it's going to increase your grenade regeneration for a short duration anytime that we get a Radiant to allies. But if you're playing solo, I'm not sure if this actually works, so if you're playing solo, you might not want to use this, but either way, it's pretty good. Ember of Eruption is nice because it's just going to give our ignitions an increased area of effect. There's a ton of different ones here. You can mess around with them as you please. The only ones that you really absolutely need, I would say, is Ember of Torches and Ember of Solace. The other ones are kind of just nice. I might even experiment with just taking it off and just having Gunpowder Gamble, because you could have this up fairly often, but I don't know. It's not all that big of a deal. Play around with how you want. So ultimately how this build is going to play is that you're going to throw out your knife. It's just going to cause you to be Radiant, but it's also going to spawn wells on the ground, which is going to give you Font of Might, allowing your weapon to do even more damage. Do a little bit of damage with your weapon, then proccing the Aether's Embrace more, making it to where you do more damage with your melee, of course. And then you're also going to get grenade cooldown through those wells, so you can spam your grenade and you can spam your dodge. Which weapons you want to use is kind of up to you. Ultimately, you do want a 1-2 punch shotgun if you want your melee to do a lot of damage, but if you don't care about the melee doing a ton, or you don't want to use a 1-2 punch shotgun, you don't have to. You can use literally whatever you want. I recommend using a Wastelander because it's pretty good, has good dexterity, and it procs 1-2 punch fairly easily, and it's going to allow you to use a solar weapon in the solar slot here. There's a lot of different solar weapons in this game. Ultimately, what I found to be pretty good, Sunshot is ultimately what I think is the absolute best solar weapon in this game. However, if you use Sunshot, a lot of the explosions and stuff are going to make it to where it's hard to stack up Aether's Embrace. But if you use the BXR here, I'll just show you guys real quick. If you use the BXR, you can just just shoot at a guy and you have it stacked up almost instantly because it's a pulse rifle, right? And it has a really fast fire rate, so you can get it stacked up like almost instantly, right? And if you use Sunshot, it's a little bit harder to get it stacked up. So right here you can see that I just shoot the guy and boom, I immediately have the strength and heavy knife, and this does pretty good damage. I have one that is Adrenaline Junkie Demolitionist, which is really good, but ultimately you can use whatever solar weapon that you want. Having the Sunshot is really good for AoE. Stop attacking me, please. This red back that I have does a ton of damage. You can get a retrace path, which is pretty good. Cartesian coordinate if you're using a primary that isn't solar, or ancient gospel or whatever. There's a ton of different solar weapon options. I'm sure you guys are aware of them. And then for the heavy weapon slot, if you want to just do a whole bunch of damage to bosses and stuff, Gjallarhorn obviously is going to be really, really good there. You could use Sleeper as well, or if you want your melee to do more damage and you're doing more solo content where there isn't bosses with a ton of health, Tractor Cannon is going to enable you to debuff them and then do a lot of extra damage that way. In terms of the mods that we're going to be using, so let's just go over every single piece here. Harmonic Siphon is nice to create more orbs of power when we're going to get weapon final blows, which we're going to be doing with whatever solar weapon that we're using. That's going to give us more orbs for more super. Font of Might ultimately just going to give us extra weapon damage by 25%, which is very, very good there. And then we're going to be using Bountiful Wells so that anytime that we spawn an elemental well, it's going to give us additional energy so that we get our grenade back even faster. I have Pulse Rifle Loader here, and Impact Induction is actually really good because anytime that we do damage with our melee, it's going to reduce our grenade cooldown. And then on the chest piece here, I just have Well of Life. Anytime that we pick up a solar well, it's going to give us health regen, which is really, really strong survivability wise. So I really like using that. And then on the boots here, Recuperation also gives us a ton of survivability, as well as Innervation, reducing our grenade cooldown. And then, of course, for our well spawning, we're going to be using Melee Wellmaker. We're going to be spawning these all the time because we're getting a lot of kills with our melee. And anytime that there's a miner around, we can just instantly one-shot him with that. Alternatively, though, you could also use Elemental Ordnance so that you can just spawn wells with your grenade. It's up to you. There's a ton of different ways to take advantage of this. I want to talk about some other options when it comes to mods that you could use in the final slot here. In terms of your stats and stuff, I'd recommend getting 100 Discipline. The rest you could put into Resilience for damage reduction. You don't need all that much recovery because you're getting a lot of it through Ember of Tempering. I imagine it's giving like 20 or 30 recovery, maybe even more, maybe less. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. 74 recovery is more than enough. I'd recommend just getting a lot of Discipline, and then you could just put the rest of the points into Resilience or whatever. It doesn't really matter, or like Intellect or something. In terms of other mods that are particularly good, so in my previous video I mentioned if you pair Elemental Charge with High Energy Fire, this is actually going to stack on top of Font of Might and Radiant, giving you a total of 88% extra damage. So that's something that you could do, but it does take up 2 mod slots. Additionally, if you wanted to get rid of Elemental Ordnance or Melee Wellmaker, you could put on Explosive Wellmaker, which is going to work pretty well with things like Sunshot, etc., but ultimately I don't really think that it's entirely necessary. You could also manage to fit in Well of Ordnance to get even more grenade cooldown, but when you have Bountiful Wells, etc., it doesn't really seem like you need all that extra cooldown, but there's a lot of different ways to set it up. You could also get, Elemental Armaments to spawn wells if you don't have, Melee Wellmaker or Elemental Ordnance or any of these solar ones. Another way to set it up is Heal Thyself. If you want even more survivability, you could just Heal Thyself with Elemental Charge, but ultimately I like the way that I have it set up. Again, I'll go over it. So Melee Wellmaker to spawn the wells and Elemental Ordnance, or you could use Explosive Wellmaker to spawn the wells or Elemental Armaments, and then you want to have Well of Life for survivability, Bountiful Wells to get more energy per well that you spawn because you're going to spawn an extra well, which is then going to give you more energy, and then Font of Might for the extra damage. That's pretty much going to be it for the build. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please try to drop a like if you did, subscribe for a video similar to this one, and let me know in the comments what you guys think about the build. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Peace.